at the same time as you were doing some of these free jazz gigs and playing with you guys, you were still making a living playing commercial music.
Yeah, up until. Yeah, there again, there was. In Toronto, I don't think Toronto's ever been a really big jazz town. Some people say it is, but I think.
And you talk about your music as being free jazz. What does that mean?
Free jazz? Well, you don't. There's no real set form as far as like construction and like chords and what have you, and like standard tunes are we call A, B, and A,
Sure.
which is like A repeats, then goes to the bridge, which is a B, and back to the. Well, that's.
So the traditional.
That's out of the way. So basically, you're standing there and you've got to come up with something. Is what it really is. You have nothing to lean on.
So you come up with a phrase and then just build on it.
You can't blubber away on your. I know a lot of saxophone players will just sort of wiggle their fingers, but that ain't worth shit, really. It's really hard. I found it hard coming out of like traditional reading and because this is shit.
Why did you want to make this switch then?
Why do I want to do it?
Yeah.
Well, the world of commercial music was horrible when I was involved in it for 35 years. And it ain't getting any better. And there's really nothing much for musicians anymore as far as playing. So I thought it was a good time to do my own thing. I mean, I'm not involved in making a living playing music anymore.
Right. So is free jazz a relatively new pursuit for you?
No, I first free jazz I heard would have been around 1958. So it's the newest form, really.
But when did you start?
When did I start doing it? Well, when nobody was looking, in the early '60s. But
where's Cecil Taylor come into that?
Cecil was back in the late '50s.
So he was one of
He was
he was a breakaway kind of a guy.
The first time I heard him, he's very. He's got all that traditional, the techniques. First time I heard him was with Sonny Rollins, and Sonny Rollins was playing tunes, of course, which he does, and Cecil knew all these tunes, but his approach to them was like.
Well, you're just turning it upside down. Like
Right,
Thelonious Monk could play everything that you'd set in front of him, but he would just turn the music upside down.
Yeah, he was sort of, Monk was probably the first, or one of the first to get outside of bebop.
It's taken bebop and pushing it off the edge. Its next logical step is.
So you're basically playing without a map. You don't have charts or.
And then I wouldn't put this in any newspaper, but it's the truth, because I've always figured that if people recognize the beginning, and the end is the same as the beginning, which is traditional. What goes on in the middle, they don't have a fucking clue about anyway. So I can play what I want.
Well, why not put that in the newspaper? Because anybody that listens to
Well, it's a bit of a cheek, isn't it? Implying that people don't know what the fuck they're up to.
But I mean, not necessarily that. But I mean,
I don't want people come around and beat me on the head either.
You've got a phrase or a snippet of melody that introduces a tune and ends it, and in the middle you go wherever you want, and it'll be a different place every time, which is what we're doing. So.
But we don't always use themes either. Like that last gig we did was doing poetry and saxophone. We didn't rehearse it or do anything like that. Some of it worked out pretty good actually. Some of it.
Let's just to sort of have a better context. Let's do a quick sort of biographical sketch. Start at the beginning.
Okay.
Born in England and played clarinet.
I started, it started in '45, and I was like so bad. But there were so many bands in those days. There were so many gigs, especially on New Year's. People were desperate to have somebody filling the chair.
And what sort of gig was it? Was it a
Dance.
Oh,
Glenn Miller tunes.
Right,
all
right,
that
right.
old shit.
big band stuff?
Yeah, well, that was, most of the bands that played dances and what have you in England in those days were at least 3 saxophones, 2 trumpets, a trombone. They were pretty set sort of things, and they all played these.
And you were playing sax?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They played these charts that probably can still buy them now, like band arrangements.
Sure.
So if you play with one band and could make it with them, you can make it with all these others because they all had the same music. Another reason why it's not happy.
It was pretty simple music, like
Yeah.
just a string of pearls and in the mood and all that stuff.
Exactly. But so I was teaching myself to play basically. I didn't have any lessons. Then I got
So you taught yourself to read?
I got conscripted into the armed forces, dragging and screaming, I may add. And
That's a surprise.
oh baby, that was the
It's
only.
the British Armed Forces?
Yeah, the Royal Air Force,
Okay.
where I shot up the ranks from aircraftsman second class to aircraftsman first class in a matter of 2
Overnight?
years.
Oh, 2 years.
Yeah, it was overnight. I was only in it for 2 years.
Right. And
Or I
you-
could have finished up being a corporal.
But were you playing music while you were in
Yeah,
there?
that
so
was
you
my
were-
gig.
And what age were you then?
19.
So you probably had. Were you a working musician before you went?
Yeah, I wasn't making a very good living, and rightly so, as it was. Yeah, I never really. When I came to Canada, it was probably the first day gig I ever had.
When was
Just,
that?
I know, 54. In those days, you had to be in you had to be resident of Canada for a year before you get your union card, and everything was musicians' union then. Like every cheesy little bar was that. I got a gig on the Toronto Stock Exchange. I never had a job before.
Stock
I told him I worked in the London Stock Exchange, and they would ask me questions, and I'd say,
We do it differently there.
Yeah, there you go. As soon as I got my union card.
So it's fair to say you bluffed your way into a job. Doing that.
Yeah, bullshit.
And then you did
I
that.
didn't want it anyway, but
So you did that for the year until you
Did it
could
for a
get your union card to play music.
yeah. And then there was the magic of Yonge Street in the 50s. There were a lot of bars. There were a lot of, everybody had a band. Like every cheesy little bar. Town Tavern was the hippest one, though.
Which one?
I saw Miles Davis there twice
Town?
at the Town
With an E on
Tavern.
it, right?
Yeah. Twice. And it was like the joint only held, if it held 200 people, it was stretching it. And they'd bring Miles up and all these names. And I've had people say, well, yeah, Miles, in the 50s, Miles wasn't that big of a star. But nevertheless, he always came up in his Ferrari, which told me that he was making more than the union minimum of $125 a week, So,
Were you playing jazz then? Or were you
No,
playing
no.
R&B?
not that much. I was playing a lot of R&B. Like R&B. I don't know what it is now. I know it's still R&B, but I don't think it's the same kind of thing.
No,
It's like James Brown, Etta James, that
Soul
kind
music.
of. Yeah.
yeah, it was big during the late 50s, early 60s. Then.
Yeah. Playing bars.
But it
I'm
was.
playing jazz occasionally. I did a lot of gigs with Rob McConnell, the trombone player, at that time. Before he had Boss Brass, he had a quintet. And I played baritone in that.
So, but most of, like, as far as making a living, it was mostly these soul bands and R&B bands.
Yeah, I wasn't making no living out of jazz.
And how did it work? Did you was it a regular band that you play with, or were you?
No, it's like a gun. Whoever wanted to pay me. My only restriction on being hired was I would not look for a clown band. I worked polka bands and shit. I tell you, one time I got this phone call and this guy, it was for the Kitchener Oktoberfest thing. And he paid good, and I said, yeah, man, sure, I'll do it. So I drove out to Kitchener, and I had, this traditional black suit, tie, shirt. I get to this gig, this band leader throws me in these fucking leather trousers and says,
jump into this.
And a hat with a feather.
Yeah.
And I said, you ain't fucking wearing that. He said, you gotta, it's a polka band. I said, I'm sorry, man, no. He said, well, you might as well go home then. I said, cool. I said, I will be at the union on Monday morning about this. I said, because in the union rules, it states that a one-night gig, like a casual engagement, as they called it, dark suit, shirt and tie. Unless the leader, when he booked you, specified, blah, blah,
bring
blah.
your leader home.
In which case she said, are you fucking nuts? So anyway, suddenly he was my buddy. He let me play the rest of the evening. That's the kind of gigs I was doing. Jewish weddings was a big deal.
So you were just
mercenary.
willing to make any kind of music that people would pay you for. Did you all, after that year with the stock exchange, did you work a day job at all?
No.
All
You are what you is, as Frank Zappa says. Used to say.
Handsome. Where's your suit and tie?
It's my t-shirt. I never did a gig.
Later
I never did a gig in a t-shirt and jeans until I guess the late 70s, early 80s. And I worked with Bill King. I could wear whatever I wanted. It was awesome. After 30-some years or whatever.
What kind of band was that?
Bill King? It was kind of a rock band. We got nominated for a Juno one year. Never mind.
The music business changed and basically put you out of work. It wasn't the same kind
Yeah,
of
the whole electronic thing kicked ass on musicians.
So what do you mean when you say there is no music business anymore?
Well, for a start, most jingles, commercials, are done by one guy with a machine, which maybe used to hire as many as 20 musicians to do a jingle. But if you only got one guy to deal with, it's way better.
So was that part of what you would do too? Show up at the studio?
No, I didn't do any jingles. No. That was for the Mo Kaufmans as well. That could come in, and no matter what music you put in front of them, it would be so busy, and they'd just sit there and play it like they played it all their life.
Yeah.
Put their horn away, and see you and go to the next studio. I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
That kind of
Not that
ability.
Not that kind of leader.
Like those guys are good players too.
Right.
No, I didn't do that shit. A little bit of recording, not much.
So mostly.
We did a background for a couple of cheesy Canadian movies. Oh, man. Now I hear I don't know, I'm not into technology, that the singers don't really have to worry too much about singing in tune. They have a machine that means like the end, you don't need talent anymore.
Even you could be a singer.
It comes out sounding, you said everybody sounds the same kind of thing. See, that's another thing with the whole, music education, I think, has become the field in music, as far as making a living.
Yeah.
But I hear these saxophone players. They come out of these schools, they got technique from hell. I mean, they can play so marvelously as far as technical ability. Every last one of them sounds like a John Coltrane clone. So how is that jazz? It's not improvising, it's shit they've learned, you know.
Yeah.
I can't tell one from another, but you know, like in the olden days, you know, you could certainly hear the difference between Roland Kirk and Charlie Parker and all these guys. They all had their own sound.
So the fact that there's so much education available musically is turning out great musicians without a lot of.
That's an industry in itself. Isn't it?
So
they're technically.
And oh yeah, you know, don't get me wrong. These guys can play, but they ain't playing anything.
Yeah, what like the tradition? The tradition you're trying to keep alive, or it's like where do you see your place in that?
That place.
It's like it's you know
down there, man. I don't know. I guess because I feel that the more musicians that pursued this course, maybe there'd be somebody in there. Maybe there'd be the Charlie Parker of the 21st century. If nobody's going to do it, that's the end of it.
Disappear.
You know, it's like Latin. You know, not too many people talk that. You know. First saxophone player I ever heard actually the first music I heard that impressed me was an old dude named Louis Jordan. He had a band, Louis Jordan and the Timpani Five. And I was like, I'd never heard of saxophone really. I heard Glenn Miller. And then shortly after that I heard Charlie Parker, and that was I should have been a smart enough kid to say, well, you know, that's so good, like fuck it, I'm never gonna play. But oh yeah, I'll be just like Charlie Parker.
Well, you were.
Or whatever. I don't know what I was thinking. Who knows?
You were one of a whole generation of saxophone players that said the same thing. No?
Probably.
Like you were the only one who was saying that. I don't think.
So that's really how I got going with the whole thing.
What of the artist jazz band and your connection to the abstract painters?
Artist jazz band. I had an English buddy. He was a great wonderful bass player, and he was playing in a band with Michael Snow was playing piano. It was a Dixieland band. And I used to get they'd bring in Buck Clayton to play with a band for a week, or the joint would, you know, some fairly famous American would come in and play with him. Anyway, Michael Snow, of course, was, I guess, reasonably well established back then. Yeah. So I was introduced to Michael Snow from my buddy Terry Foster. And I somehow, you know, gradually I linked up with all these other painters. What a weird bunch they are, eh, Peter?
Yes. Graham Coftree. What's his music? His painting and his music.
I thought he's very good at both. The only problem with his playing, he never had the endurance, but you could always hear his trombone playing. Yeah, man, if this guy was healthy,
he could be a musician.
He could play. He certainly could paint. But those guys, they never made any movies when I was with them.